Well, good morning, everybody. It is precisely 10 o'clock. I'm aware that we will undoubtedly have participants joining the event for the next couple of minutes. So in those few minutes that we will give to people to join, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping here so that you're aware of how to engage with the speakers and panelists that you'll be listening to today. My name is David Ragazzi. I will be your moderator for this event. And in the background is my colleague in number one, Hide Vedman. If he turned his microphone off, he could say a very quick hello, but he will be helping me behind the scenes. So I've put this first slide up. If you can't hear me, obviously you can't hear what I'm about to say, but if you're having any technical issues, you can't hear something, you can't ask questions, Hide Vedman, who you can see on the list of panelists, is our technical support, our primary technical support for this event. So you can send him an email if you're having an issue, or you can, in the chat box, you can specifically send a message to him. You can, of course, send a general chat to the group. He is the one that will pick it up to make sure that we are able to help you out. So I'd like to welcome you to this opening session of the Conference Week on Aging. And if Hida can take us to the next slide, please. I'd just like to start things off by saying, obviously, we all have the luxury, I mean, maybe not everybody here, but a lot of us have the luxury of conducting and attending this webinar at home. So I would very much encourage you to take advantage of that. If you're with your laptop, you can sit on your couch. You can have a nice cup of tea, a nice cup of coffee. We're obviously going to be here for around 2.5 hours, so this can be quite some time. We will take a coffee break in the middle to give you a little bit of a break. But please feel free that we want you to enjoy this event. We want you to feel relaxed. And unlike an event where you would have to be face-to-face, you can very, very much take advantage of the fact that for some of you, you can do this from the comfort of your home. Now, if I won't take you through the agenda, obviously we have a number of speakers today. You'll have an opportunity to interact with them. And the way that you do this interaction is we're going to be using a tool called Slido. So if you all have your phones with you, but you can also do it from a website, and you go to slido.com, it will take you to this lovely screen, which you can see in front of you as well, where it will allow you to type a question. And so, for example, if you're on your phone and you click on type, or you type your question, it will allow you to send us a message and optionally put your name on it. So if you would like to ask some very difficult question on which you would not like your name attached, you have the opportunity to ask your questions anonymously. Now, in order to try this out, we always like to make sure that everything is working. So the code that you will need to enter is ESPO, which will bring you to the screen where questions can be asked. So what I'd like to ask of the participants is, as our speakers and panelists will know, I very much always like to know what people are having for breakfast. This is an incredibly important thing. And we were actually discussing amongst ourselves, what is the breakfast that you need to eat in order to live to the age of 100? Which I assure you, as soon as I hear from everybody, I will call my father right after this event and let him know what it would be. So please feel free to use Slido right now, very quickly, so this way we can make sure that that you know how the system works and how questions can be asked. But please feel free to put it in there. Already oats, this is very good for my daughter because she loves to have oats in the morning. One of the things that you can also do, you'll notice as you see the questions coming up on Slido that you have the opportunity to like questions. And this will allow us to prioritize questions that are coming from you in the audience. Oh, poppy seed cake, that is, my wife would love that one. I would love that one as well. So that allows you to say which of the questions that you would like us to prioritize, just on the off chance that we have so many questions that we're not quite sure what to go with. So what you can do here is, if there's something in that list of what we should be having for breakfast to live to the age of 100, please feel free to like the one that you think is the most relevant. We can see that poppy seed, even though it has 0, it somehow is the system. Even the system knows that poppy seed cake is something that we should all be having for breakfast. We've got a like. I appreciate that as well. So this is the system that we will use in order to engage with one another. Oh, somebody's even got a picture of a bagel. So we can see that Slido is working. This is your, we will leave Slido open the whole time. So as the speakers are speaking, we would encourage you to ask your questions as they come to you, as you're sitting on your couch enjoying one of our very interesting speakers. Type your question in, and then we will be bringing up Slido at different points so that we can see what people's questions are so that the speakers can engage with them. So that is all of the housekeeping from my side. So what I would like to do is I'd like to turn the floor over to Piera Petruzzi, who is going to introduce things a little bit. And then my role from here on in is just to be your webinar cop, so to speak, and direct the traffic. So I will first direct to Piera.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. I see that more than 120 people have registered for our event. So welcome, everyone, to the ESPON Conference Week on Aging, which takes inspiration from the World Health Organization Decade of Healthy Aging and is organized in cooperation with Age Platform Europe, Eurocities, and Great Manchester Combined Authority. It's about aging, it's about population aging, which has become even more evident in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis that has affected our whole society, but older people in particular. This shows once more how important it is to design our territories age-friendly and keep older people's interest in mind in policy making. A group of cities asked for ESPON support to investigate the effectiveness of policies to develop age-friendly cities. And ESPON responded with the project ACPA that includes a report, policy handbook, case studies reports, map and figures, and all these deliveries are available at our website in English and in the stakeholder national languages. This opening session will be followed by sessions on the case study cities investigated in ESPON ACPA. These sessions will take place between tomorrow, the 1st of December, and Friday, the 4th. You can still register for the city sessions at our website and exchange with policymakers, experts, and peers in national languages. I would like to thank all participants, speakers, our partners, namely Ecoris and Nordregio, and the stakeholders that have asked for support, namely Paul McGarry and his colleagues from Great Manchester Combined Authority, which is the lead stakeholder of our ESPON ACPA study, Tom Van Benten and Johan Oster from Amsterdam, Natalia Rossetti Mafioli and Ramon Pablo Malagrida from Barcelona, Lisa Holtz from Gothenburg, Anne Miekenol and Yvonne Van Wyk from Mengelo, Michel Laurent from Nantes, Monica Enge Eriksen and Anne-Berry Rafos from Oslo and Norway, Francisco Rivas Gorostiaga from Zaragoza. And it has been really a huge pleasure to work with all of you. Finally, I would like to mention that we are drafting a policy brief on aging that will include the outcomes of this week. So let's kick off this ESPON week, David. And to do so, I would use a what-if approach. May I?
Of course, of course.
Thank you. So what if we turn the risk of aging into an opportunity and launch a kind of silver deal, just like the Green Deal? Thank you, and enjoy the opening session with our inspiring speakers.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Piera. I will be thinking about the great silver deal myself. So to start things off, we will have our keynote speech from Dubravka Šuica. So Ms. Šuica has been the Vice President of the European Commission for Democracy and Demography since 2019. And previously, she served as mayor of Dubrovnik in Croatia, of course, and as member of the European Parliament. As the Commissioner for Democracy and Demography, she has a broad range of responsibilities, including mapping and assessing the impact of demographic change in the European Union. She also coordinates the work on long-term vision for rural areas, including on the effects of demographic change on connectivity and access to services. Finally, she is responsible for producing a green paper on aging and launching a broad debate on long-term impacts, such as on care and pensions and supportive active aging. So at this fit, I would like to pass the virtual floor on to Ms. Schwitzer so that she can kick off with the keynote speech. Over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, David. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, I really want to thank you for this opportunity to address this conference and also the many organizations joining us from across European Union with the view to collectively addressing the issues surrounding our European cities and our aging population. In my role as Vice President for Democracy and Demography, I work on a full life cycle from child rights to active aging. When it comes to aging, let me be clear on 2 points from the outset. Aging concerns all generations, not just the elderly. This is my first point. Secondly, aging is not just about challenges, it is also about embracing the opportunities that comes with aging, and they are many. Hard evidence shows that Europe is an aging continent. Preparing cities for aging is not a question of minimizing disruptions. Rather, we need a conversation on how we create our future in a positive sense, a future in which many of us enjoy longer lives. Aging in cities requires a comprehensive approach. We must ensure that not only the physical accessibility, but also the perceived accessibility and safety within cities enables older people to remain active. Addressing demographic change is key to building a fairer and more resilient society. I work with my colleague commissioners to ensure that our policies take account of the implications and impact of demographic change. Hence, the necessity of producing the Commission's first ever report on the impact of demographic change within the first 6 months of our mandate. It was adopted on 17th June. The report relies on hard evidence and comparable data at European level and also at regional level. It brings out the major impacts of demographic change, such as an economic growth, labor markets, health and long-term care needs, and public finances. The report is a valuable reference for our current and future work. This report identified longer life expectancies as a major development within the Union. Older persons are the fastest growing age group. The report indicates the interrelationship between taking action on demographic change and recovery from COVID-19 pandemic, and references such as loneliness, social isolation, and providing access to essential services and facilities. It's a strong base for better informed policy making. As a Vice President in the European Commission, my role is one of coordinating several portfolios and services with the clear aim of improving our policy making. At this moment, we are working on various strands that come out of this report, and the first one up is the Green Paper on Aging, which will be adopted in early 2021, I think end of March. It will launch a debate on the long-term impacts of aging with an emphasis on care and pensions, intergenerational solidarity, and how to foster active aging. Aging, as I already said, concerns all generations, both young and elderly. Keeping in mind intergenerational solidarity, the paper will dive into the impacts, challenges, and opportunities of aging and economy, society, and across the regions. Identifying what aging means for both the elderly and the young is necessary. We will assess whether our social protection systems are fit to deal with the needs of aging population. But we cannot do this alone. We count on wide participation and the wide commitment to make active aging a reality in a time increasingly dominated by digitalization. We plan to look more closely at issues such as loneliness, social isolation, mental health, economic resilience, and long-term care, among others. We need to better harness the opportunities that come with aging. This includes the positive role older people play in the society, the silver economy, voluntary works, and other areas. If I may interrupt here, I really like the silver deal, so let's work on it together. Loneliness is a phenomenon, and let's look at this for a moment. As a group, the elderly are already more exposed to social isolation and loneliness than other parts of our societies. It is a tough fact to face. But I'm an optimist too, and I do not believe that loneliness has to be a fact of life, and I will work on that. Cities can be an anonymous place to live, which may contribute to loneliness, and we need to look at how to manage this. You said at the beginning from my CV, I have been a mayor, and once, as you know, once a mayor, always a mayor. Connecting with people is key for me in order to do my job well. I'm very sensitive to this idea of connection, because when we connect, even if we are alone, we do not feel lonely. This is important. However, we see the evidence of disconnection. Today, we see this happening not only with the elderly, but also with young people. For the elderly, given COVID-19, most are unable to connect with friends and family. This impacts their overall health, their mental health, their ability to seek care and assistance. The restrictions that were surmountable in normal times, these have become impossible during this pandemic. Children and young people are also affected, as they are unable to play or spend time with us like before. In some cases, they cannot study or have not been able to go to school and university under the same conditions as before. So it is important that cities become an environment where everyone, including the elderly, can connect with each other. An example of what can be done is the Radar project in Lisbon, which aims to monitor people over 65 years old who live alone in Lisbon. The project identifies a community of radars near the place where elderly people live, such as pharmacies, coffees, hairdressers, neighbors, family, and volunteers. They follow the elderly in order to detect risk situations and deal with it in a personalized way. The project is part of the program Lisbon City of All Ages, and it aims at greater solidarity based on the 3 pillars of active life, autonomous life, and supported life. This project demonstrates just how caring, inclusive, and vibrant city environments can be, and also they should be for elderly. Aging in cities requires a comprehensive approach. Heavy traffic in cities can cause anxiety and act as a barrier to old people's mobility. We must ensure that not only, as I said, the physical accessibility, but also the perceived accessibility and safety within cities is enabling older people to remain active. Increasing the security of public spaces requires action from cities. There is evidence of a measurable reduction in stress and improvement in mental health and well-being when security is addressed. Creating an age-friendly city is dependent on an integrated approach. Successful initiatives are designed and managed with several institutional and non-institutional actors, which range from civil society organizations, leisure and sport facilities to restaurants. Crucially, we must involve all the people during the design and implementation of this in cities. I like the example of Oslo, where the involvement of seniors is a central principle in the city's commitment to become more age-friendly. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, today some of us are elderly. The fact is, one day we will all be elderly, if we are lucky, of course. Even the young are impacted directly by the prospect of living a longer life. So you see how aging is relevant to all generations. Where we live also impacts how we age, and so it's vital that cities can be a shining example of intergenerational solidarity, caring, and inclusiveness. Aging, as I said already, brings both challenges and opportunities, so it's important that we balance our policy making for the elderly. But not just the elderly, for everyone across the entire life cycle. Living longer in better health is one of the highest expectations of European citizens. This brings challenges and opportunities. Let us seize the momentum together to find the best policy solutions to make our cities a wonderful place to live through the whole life cycle. Thank you very much for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for those introductory words, which I think set the themes that we'll be talking about today quite nicely. So at this stage, I am going to pass the floor, the virtual floor, onto 3 speakers. So you get 3 speakers for the price of 1. And let me give a brief introduction to them before I allow them to begin speaking. So we have the first individual will be Dr. Viktor Shidarovsky. He's the new director of ESPON, where he started in September 2020. And he has over 20 years of experience in the field of territorial development in a variety of roles, including as a lecturer, researcher, advisor, policy developer, and program and project manager. So I thought he was going to fit one more title in there, but he has quite a number. The second speaker in this session will be Paul McGarry, who is the head of the Greater Manchester Aging Hub, which is a part of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Paul has contributed to Age-Friendly Manchester, aiming to improve the quality of life for older people and make the city a better place to grow older. Since the start of ESPON ACPA, Paul has been representing Greater Manchester as the lead stakeholder in the project. And our final speaker will be Eric van Ossenbruggen, who is a consultant for urban and regional development at Ecoris. He's an economic geographer concerned with spatial differences in socioeconomic development. Living conditions and economic development are the 2 main policy areas where he advises cities and regional authorities. And he's been involved in a variety of research activities on the European level, including ACPA, for which he has been the project manager. So with those introductions in mind, I'd like to pass the virtual floor along. I believe that we will begin with Dr. Shidarovsky.
Thank you very much, dear Vice President Šuica, dear partners and stakeholders in this event. We are very happy that you've come quite a long way virtually to be with us this Monday morning. And I think, Pierre, I'm very much subscribing to your idea of silver deal because I'm getting silver in my hair. So I think I should be part of the deal. We are ESPON and we are not Epson. We don't produce printers and peripherals. We produce European territorial evidence. We are an EU-funded program that provides data, indicators, methodologies, and policy recommendations. We do help policymakers and stakeholders, and we do hope that we'll be also assisting Vice President Šuica, European Commission, on the journey to benchmark all single European region and city in Europe to help identify new challenges and potentials, and also to shape successful development policies for the future. We've been operational since 2002. We connect governments, researchers, and practitioners. We draw policy recommendations on how to cope with challenges and potentials for the European territories. We show how cities, regions, and countries may perform and offer advice how they may perform even better based on, as you know quite well, the European territorial evidence. We do offer free data, knowledge, and visuals for every interested stakeholder. What ESPON does, we address and support policymakers at EU, national, regional, and local level to help them look at the development of the areas from the functional point of view over the administrative borders. So this is our cutting edge. We don't respect the existence of borders. We say that certain development processes go over the administrative borders, and that is why we need to be attentive to that. Whatever the field you are working in, be it demography, migration, SMEs, youth unemployment, infrastructure, environmental issues, or the use of structural funds, ESPON provides the famous European territorial evidence that is produced by experts, and we then support our decisions. With ESPON, you may also find new ideas, how other cities, regions, and countries found solutions that your area is still struggling with. What European territories will look like in 20, 30 years? Is Europe able to address the challenges that cities, mountain areas, islands, or metropolitan areas are facing in the era of globalization? And also, ESPON can give you access to a vast pool of experts around Europe if you need further analysis, data, and exchanges. This specific project that we have gathered for today, ESPON-ACPA, is just one of the examples how we work with stakeholders while applying the territorial approach. Upon request of 8 cities, we have delivered a targeted analysis on aging population and best practices how to respond to this challenge with place-based, needs-sensitive, and well-timed policies. So, dear friends of aging, as the Vice President said, this is unavoidable that we all are going to age, and hopefully we are going to age in good health and good spirits. So welcome to this event, and we do hope that all of you will take a lot from this Monday morning gathering. Thank you very much.
I will just pass things straight to Paul.
Morning, everyone. From an almost sunny Manchester. It's great to see so many people on the call. I'm Paul McGarry, and I work for the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, which brings together 10 local authorities, 2.8 million people in Greater Manchester, along with our elected Mayor, Andy Burnham. I just wanted to say really a few points about this project, why it's been important, what the impact of it, and how we might look ahead to some of the challenges and opportunities that we have. So I guess like everybody at the moment, you know, you could spend your life, you could spend virtually every day coming to events like this, or certainly events like about aging, certainly events about the future of cities. But actually there are very few programs of work and events which bring those two things together. And I think it's important to recognise this dynamic of urban ageing in the future of kind of policy and strategy for our cities. And I think in many ways, this has been the centre of the motivation for this programme of work. There's something very specific about it as well, which is that the point in this programme, and it's great to see everybody, if only virtually, for the first time in some time, was based on the work of the Eurocities Urban Ageing Working Group. So this really is a group of people that are responsible for leading these ageing programmes at a city or a city regional basis. And, you know, we've been meeting for a number of years, and I think there are a few things that prompt this work. The first thing is, as I said, this need for a specific urban view on ageing, and particularly from people who are leading these programs, if you like, practitioners, strategists, and so on. Because sometimes I think those voices get lost in the broad brush of our programs and initiatives. I think the second thing that was important to us is that we needed to counterbalance, which are these predominantly biomedical and care narratives of ageing, which one that's kind of rooted in a social, economic assessment of ageing. Almost universally, our strategies on ageing are focused on the needs of our health and care systems, which is important, but less so on the ways in which people live, on the relationships that they have, on the desires that they have in life. I think the next thing that motivated us was the need to make real improvements in people's lives. many of us have been involved, and I'm sure colleagues here have been involved in the production of what we think are important reports, and often they are. But following that through into making the real improvements in people's lives is sometimes less difficult to chart and describe. So it's absolutely central to, I think, this work that we meet and we have met in this programme to make differences to the lives of our neighbours, our family members, of future generations. And I'll come on to COVID in a moment, most specifically the environment we find ourselves in. I think the next key point here as well is that we need to get a platform, and our programme is a platform for different groups of older adults. Again, I think one of the challenges, or one of the features often of programmes of work, is that they either become pathologized through this kind of medical narrative of aging, or they don't really give a voice or aren't co-produced with not just older people, but different groups of older people who may be marginalised, on lower incomes, or are in particular groups that face particular challenges, such as people from Black and minority ethnic communities, lesbian and gay communities, and so on. And the last point, which I guess is a bit of a British point of view at the moment, and for me personally, for those of us in Manchester, we found it very important that we needed to continue to act and feel and be part of the European family, despite the decisions that made in the last few years in the UK. So just a couple of other points really before I just move on to some, I think, personal observations. The other critical things I think for us is that we needed to give a voice to the cities and to the city regions in this work. That we didn't need our work just mediated by others. It needed to be the work that's making an impact. We're also aware of this paradox of patterns of urban ageing. So all of our cities, city regions and other areas are undergoing this profound demographic change, but it's less easy to spot the city leaders who are describing that process, who are taking action on it, and are elevating ageing as being a critical issue for our cities. And also, for those of us in low-income areas, this issue to focus and to continue to focus on inequalities. So 20% of people, of older people in Greater Manchester live in under the official poverty line. And it seems to me as we move forward, maintaining a focus on that so that it doesn't just become a focus on those who can do well out of ageing is continued. From a personal point of view, and I don't know whether I can speak on behalf of other colleagues, actually doing this kind of work in cities can be lonely work. We've heard that word already. There aren't an enormous amount of us doing this work across Europe. And typically in local municipalities, you may find one or two people. And it seems to me that this work is giving a platform to expand the number of people who have the expertise, infrastructure and the capacity. It's also a point of entry for people who are new to this work. It's also about inspiring our colleagues and learning from each other. And I hope that I speak on behalf of everybody when I say that we can't wait to catch up with each other, because it's in those meeting rooms, it's in the corridors, it's in the restaurants in the evening where often we do some of our best work. Look forward to seeing everybody. I can't finish without saying something about COVID. So the UK has had, like many countries, had a huge challenge. It's been a desperate disaster, really, for us in this country. And what COVID has done is to shine a light, I think, on those underlying ageist narratives that are very prevalent in large parts of political and social discourse. There is those that are still publicly willing to say that the deaths of older people is almost an acceptable price to pay for economic growth and so on. So it seems to me that we have to make our voices heard on this issue. And there are other issues as well around, such as the employment of older workers. And I think at the centre of all this, as we've done in Greater Manchester and will continue to do, is to give a platform to the different voices of older people, to tell their stories, to make their points, and to describe the things which they need to live a good later life. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Indeed, a number of themes that we'll end up addressing, in particular, I think, at the panel session. COVID obviously is, and the whole digital revolution that we're living through is accelerating on so many different levels, including on this aging topic that I think is quite relevant. Before I pass it to Eric, I'd like to remind everybody in the audience that if they do have any questions, in particular around this session or any other section, you go to slido.com with your web browser or on your phone, and that will provide you with the opportunity to ask your questions, which I can then put to our speakers and later on to panelists if we don't have time to ask the speakers. So with that reminder, I'll pass the floor on to Eric so that he can round up our 3-for-1 presentation for this first session.
Thank you, David. Yes, by now it has become perfectly clear, I think, that population aging is of great importance. But I would like to delve into that a little deeper by presenting briefly the important insights that we have gathered from the EPPA project. Of course, I cannot present everything that we have covered, but for that, I encourage you to look into the ESPON website to visit read our reports. Now, I would like to present a selection of the most important insights, and by this, we hope to present the European Commission's forthcoming green paper on aging, possibly. If we look at the maps that you see now on the screen, it is perfectly clear that there is a regional variation in population aging across Europe. On average, the current situation is that around 20% of the European population is aged 65 years or older. Even on the national level, this regional variation is persistent. For example, Italy is at the first position with 22%, almost 23%. Of the population aged 65 years and older. But if we look at the regional level, we see far more greater differences between those regions that you see on the map. For example, the region Île-de-France in France, the metropolitan region of Paris, only features 15% of its population aged 65 years and older, whereas in another region of France, Limousin, we are talking about 27%, which is a lot higher. And if we take a look at the right map, where we see the change since 2000, meaning the change, the percentual change in older population over the last 20 years, we see also very big changes. For example, and here also we see this regional variation again, because if we take a look at Spain, for example, we see that the region of Il Balear is boasting a 58% change in older population. Whereas Castilla y León is only, we only see 12% change of all the population. The situation may be even worse in Germany, for example, where there are certain regions that are doing, that are at the lowest level of population aging, with Arnsberg, for example, with 19%. But again, Brandenburg, the city region around Berlin, is faced with a population aging rate of 59%, which is again pretty high. Next slide, please. Then if we take a look into the future, things even start to become more serious, I think. There are some countries which will have, on average, on the total national level, more than 25% people aged 65 and over in 2030. But maybe we should even start to look towards 2050 when making this silver deal and when starting to battle population aging. In 2050, if we take a look at the old age dependency ratio, which is the ratio of older people against the working population. In more than 2/3 of the EU member states, we have a projected rate of over 50%, which means that in 2050, there will be less than 2 people working for every older person. And also, I would like to point out the phenomenon of super aging, which is the increase of people aged over 85 years of age. That number is projected to increase, or actually more than double by 2050 compared to the current situation. I think this portrays the seriousness of the phenomenon we're talking about today pretty much. Next slide, please. Because I think if I now may continue with the local situation, this is even more interesting to talk about today. Within cities, we also see substantial spatial differences of population aging. Usually the city center where a lot of young people live is facing an increasing number of younger people, whereas the outskirts of a lot of European cities face comparably high levels of population aging, as I've just showed on the regional level. So this really shows how important it is for cities to do research about population aging in their city, because it might be very easy to think along the lines of population aging is something of a rural phenomenon, and something that cities are not that cities should not really pay attention to. On the contrary, the opposite is the case, I think. Also, cities should be very much be concerned with population aging in certain neighborhoods that they have within their boundaries. These are 2 examples of the cities that have been featured within the ESPON-ACPA research project. There are 6 other cities that have also been part of the project, and I will try to feature them in the rest of my presentation. Next slide, please. First, I would like to shortly point out what the consequences are of the trend of population aging. Some of these have already been touched, so I'll go through this shortly. But I think the most practical one is that population aging will require more public funding in the future. The more older people we have among our population, the higher healthcare costs will also be ceteris paribus. So that is something to keep in mind. And if there are constraints on public finances, then it will maybe require calibration of strategic focus areas of city councils and city administrations. So that is something to keep in mind strategic-wise. On the more social side of the story, we have the problem, or the challenge of negativism and stereotypes. We have seen in our research that population aging is considered as a negative phenomenon by a lot of people within our society, and that a lot of negative stereotypes exist about older people. I think our society is at risk of getting more polarized by differences between older people and younger people, but also by differences between older people within various subgroups. For example, we see differences in IT skills and level of computer adaptation, as next presentations will delve more deeply into after me. We see cultural differences among older people, different cultural backgrounds, which are causes of misunderstanding among each other. And as the Commissioner Suica pointed out very well, we have the risk of loneliness, with several people older people getting behind, which is something that we should take care of. On the policy side, we see that a lot of cities are striving for continuation of age-friendly policies. Still, we have seen that a lot of initiated projects have a relatively short running time, usually due to limited finances or limited capacities within cities. So that is something we should work on, as well as better learning from aging policy, because we see that there is a lot of knowledge that should be spread among different cities about what works and what does not work. I think relevant European bodies, such as the European Commission, could be involved in here by disseminating knowledge. But I think there are also valuable knowledge platforms such as Age Platform Europe and the Eurocities Working Group on Urban Aging, as well as the EIP AHA platform. Next slide, please. I think now is the time to act, as previous presentations have already indicated, and the next ones will also indicate that. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has already declared the decade of healthy aging. The European Commission is preparing its green paper on aging. ESPON is supporting these trends by the ESPON Aqua project and its results. So I would like to declare an old used slogan and modify it a little bit into cities of the European Union, unite. I think this is the time to unite and work together, share experiences, and develop policies together in order to provide better healthy and actively aging, stimulating environments for all the people within our society. Next slide, please. In order to stimulate that, I have a couple of success factors that you can take home and start working on for your own policy strategy. These have been divided by the 8 policy domains from the World Health Organization that Dr. Huber is also delving into in a couple of minutes. But let me just very briefly touch upon these. For example, for outdoor spaces, we see that it's very important to take away barriers to visit these spaces. These barriers can be physical of nature, such as physical obstacles, but we also see barriers on the social and cognitive dimension. For example, in Zaragoza, the age-friendly shopping initiative is very inspiring because it provides older people with shops that they can visit, where not only the physical barriers are moved, but where shopkeepers are also aware of the problems that older people face. This could be related to dementia. It could be related to, all kinds of social problems that older people face, and they get assisted in such shops. But it is very important that older people can reach those destinations. And on the transportation side, we see a lot of tailored solutions that older people can use to reach destinations where public transport is unavailable. For example, in Oslo, we have the Rosa Busser, and other cities have these as well, which are mini buses where bus drivers assist older people from destination to destination. On the housing side, which is also a physical topic, I think, on the housing side, we see that optimal use of scarce residential real estate space within cities is very important. Residential real estate is scarce within cities, and if we can combine different population groups within buildings, for example, in Barcelona, where we see the Viure i Conviure project, where older people live together with students and other youngsters and share their lives. I think that's a very relevant project to take a look on. To stimulate social participation, we can have also different ways of achieving that. For example, in Amsterdam, we see the UP platform. UP, a new perspective on aging, is a platform which stimulates discussion of aging among older people. We see that a lot of older people have the tendency to neglect that they are aging, and they are not very inclined to talk about it. But by providing a very informal atmosphere where they can talk about it in a talk show setting, in a venue setting, we see that a lot of older people open up and get aware of the challenges that they're facing in a couple of years, but they also can provide older people tips and tricks how to get along with it. Next slide, please. Maybe the time is limited to delve into all these success factors, but a couple of other interesting ones are, for example, live filming in Gothenburg. This project is centered around communication and information, but the very interesting aspect about this project is that it combines multiple demands in one project. It started by giving older people an iPad or a tablet or any other device to film their personal lives within the city, letting share those experiences with the city council and reflect on it by peers, by doing it in pairs of 2, and by combining both learning IT skills, by being able to share their experiences with the city council, and by working together with other older people, we see a lot of efficient ways to let them learn new skills and to be heard. Next slide, please. Closing off, I would like to provide a few strategic policy recommendations. The most important one, I think, is to show ambition. A lot of European cities are working very ambitiously on population aging. We still see that some cities where population aging is also taking place don't have a long-term strategy at this moment. A strategy comprising of a vision, a mission, a strategy, concrete goals, and ways how to implement these goals. So we really encourage you as a policymaker to start working on such a long-term strategy. The EU Green Paper on aging should maybe help those cities as well in formulating a strategy. Flexibility is also a very important one, because the strategy is one thing, but on the other hand, cities should be aware of recent population developments and demands. These demands could originate from specific population groups or specific policy trends, such as digitalization, as we will see in the next few presentations. Also, learning is pretty important here, because learning from the past makes it easier to adapt your strategy into more efficient and more effective ways of implementing projects and other initiatives. Furthermore, as I've already indicated before, positivity is very important, as we face the barrier of polarization and misunderstanding of older people. So raising public awareness about aging among all population groups within European society is very important to make also youngsters more aware of population aging and also other population groups. Lastly, outreach is something that I would like to point out. For example, at the local level, as Paul McGarry has already indicated, more effort should be put into connecting all the relevant stakeholders within cities. This ranges from healthcare professionals to interest groups to all the people themselves, all have very valuable knowledge to bring population aging policy to a next level. Furthermore, I see on the European level very interesting opportunities, such as EU platforms. I've already indicated those, and also the European Commission in supporting knowledge dissemination and policy development by providing strategic directions. Next slide, please. I've hoped to provide you with a short introduction to the Espon-ACPA research results, but I couldn't tell everything as I indicated at the beginning. If you would like to know more, then please check out our website with the publications. And what I would like to introduce now is that the policy handbooks and the city case study reports are visible at the regional level. Are visible at the national own level, national own language of the case study regions that have participated. So, for example, in Spain, in Spanish, in French, in Dutch, in Norwegian, and in Swedish. You can download these reports at our website. Thank you very much, and hope to talk with you in the interactive discussion as well.
Great, thank you very much, Eric, for that. I suspect and expect that what you have talked about will fit very nicely into what our next speaker will be speaking about. Before I pass on the floor, I did note that a few questions had come in, a few on specific national situations around Romania and Croatia, another question around the Green Paper. Given the time, these are questions that we will come back to, we promise you, to all of the participants. We'll come back to it as a part of the panel and Q&A session. But right now, what I'd like to do is pass on the floor, the virtual floor, to Professor Dr. Christopher Philipson, who is going to be talking about urban aging, which I think matches quite well some of the things that you were talking about, Eric. Like I recall one of the ideas around older people and younger people like living together in a more common space, in the same way that in the sustainable development perspective, there's a lot of talk about social sustainability, different socioeconomic groups. So I think the way that things are organized at an urban level is actually quite interesting and one of the topics for discussion today. So to introduce Christopher Philipson, he's a professor of sociology and social gerontology at the University of Manchester. Since 2013, he has been the director of the Manchester Institute for Collaborative Research on Aging. His particular focus concerns social, political, and economic issues associated with aging populations. He's especially interested in studying questions related to family and community life in old age, problems of poverty and social exclusion, social theory and aging, and the impact of globalization on later life. He also leads an ESRC-funded international partnership of networking scheme, which brings together a number of European and North American universities engaged in the study of the impact of demographic change on urban life. With that introduction, I'd like to pass the floor on to Professor Dr. Philipson for the next presentation.
Thank you very much, David, and I'm delighted to say a few words about this really important question of urban aging, and really building on the previous speakers. First slide, please. Yeah, next slide. So what I'd like to do is, sorry, could go back to the previous slide, David. Look at some of the background very briefly to this debate on age-friendly communities, then situated in a context of an urban agenda which has started to develop in terms of looking at these issues. I'd like to look briefly at some of the advantages and disadvantages of urban environments for building age-friendly communities, look at some areas for intervention, again, building, I think, on what Eric was talking about. And finally, I've got some questions for the age-friendly movement in my last slide. Next slide, please. So I think the context which has been stimulating so much discussion about urban aging has been the remarkable success of WHO's age-friendly initiative. And we can see here how the global network of age-friendly cities and communities, which only started a decade ago, now has over 1,000 members. So it's really been a considerable achievement, with particular concentration, of course, in Europe. Next slide. So I think there is an issue, though, which I think Eric pointed out in more detail, that although we talk about urban aging, it's really important to stress the diversity of cities in terms of their aging populations. And this just points out very simply how we can go from Manchester with less than 1 in 10 of its population posing its own problems in issues in terms of how older people are treated, to other cities which already have 1 in 4, and in the case of Akita, Japan, 1 in 3 of its population 65 and over. And I think Eric is absolutely right that this diversity means we must have very diverse strategies for dealing with urban aging. Next slide. So I think there's also an interesting policy debate which has been influencing the agenda here. Firstly, the debate about sustainable cities. How can we have an urban development which meets current and future generations? UN Habitat have got this concept of harmonious cities. How can we achieve social justice in the city? Very important for younger and older people. Of course, there's the issue of unequal cities. Cities have grown more polarized over the past decade. And finally, a very significant debate about supporting people aging in place, a very common phrase now in terms of the urban aging agenda. Next slide. So I think, although a lot of our discussion is about some of the challenges for people in urban environments, I think there are great advantages, of course, that we can also see. Great cities have an infrastructure of public facilities which can support people in a variety of ways: libraries, leisure centres, and museums. They have specialist resources which may be especially important for minority groups growing old. You could argue that cities, urban areas have a broader range of social networks, which can also be very important. What we call weak, as opposed to strong ties, weak ties being relationships that are different to ourselves, but are very important in terms of maintaining vital connections. Finally, they're likely to have a more advanced digital infrastructure, and that's increasingly important, as we'll hear later, for supporting aging populations. Next slide. But it's equally true that there are challenges and disadvantages in urban environments. We've got the development of world or global cities with commanding economic and political influence. But the issues for older people or the position of older people in those cities may be seen as marginal. They may be seen as much less important than other groups, such as professional service workers, even students. Secondly, we have the emergence of cities and regions, certainly in Europe, with declining populations arising from the impact of deindustrialization. And the position of, and these are often showing marked aging populations. And I think the position of older people in those declining cities with declining populations is one of considerable concern. Cities with extremes of wealth and poverty, especially over the last 2 decades, the extent to which urban areas have become polarized within and whilst aging at the same time, I think is a very difficult dynamic. And finally, of course, part of that, the impact of gentrification in many European cities, where you have high-income groups moving into low-income areas, resulting in a population churn, which can destabilize neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So I think you can sum up, I think, some of the challenges here in 4 kind of ways. Firstly, many communities may lack the structural capacity to support aging populations. And that's why age-friendly initiatives are not a panacea for economic and social interventions of different kinds. It's also the case that aging in place, which is the goal of public policy largely for older people, may be very unattractive, where the places in which people are aging are facing economic and social decline. And my own view is that if you're going to pursue a policy of aging in place, you are bound to also pursue a policy of making those places attractive. Thirdly, I think there is a problem in terms of the lack of influence of age-friendly strategies on private developers. I mean, it's private money, private developers who dominate the financing of urban development. So I think we should get private financiers around the table when we're discussing age-friendly issues. I mean, if they're not up for it, then our cities and our urban areas will continue to be very un-age-friendly. Finally, I think, of course, communities are changing. There's greater inequality within older cohorts, growth of single-person households, which is posing a challenge in many respects, and of course, great ethnic diversity in cities. And responding to the challenge of ethnic diversity in terms of understanding aging populations, I think is very important. Okay, next slide, please. So finally, I think some areas for intervention, which I want to suggest in terms of some of the issues posed by urban aging. And I want to suggest developing policies for what are more diverse urban environments, identifying areas for collaboration, co-producing age-friendly urban environments, and a brief word on age-friendly work and COVID-19. Okay, next slide. So I think we have much greater diversity in our older population. And I think, for me, there are a number of concerns that arise from this. We need to understand better what the different interpretations of aging and age-friendly might mean amongst different groups. We don't know really enough about that. We do need to shape policies around groups with different migration and life histories. European urban areas are now made up of populations which do have great complexity in terms of their migration stories, and adapting our age-friendly work to that, I think, is very important. As is acknowledging the impact of racism, ageism, and sexism, and bringing those together much more. Ageism is important, but it interacts as well with the growth of racism in our society and sexism. And older people, groups within the older population, have been severely affected by those three dimensions. Next slide, please. The other difference, I think, about urban environments is that collaboration is really important. I think my concern here, the complexity of urban environments makes it important. And one concern that I've had, I think, is that age-friendly strategies have been weakened by being detached from movements around smart cities, healthy cities, sustainable cities. I mean, we need to have a much more joined up focus. It makes very little sense to have a separate movement for age-friendly cities, a separate movement for healthy cities. I mean, let's think about how we can link them together in a meaningful way. I think, the ideas from smart and sustainable cities, do bring in important issues for the age-friendly movement. Reducing pollution, increasing energy efficiency, responding to the impact of climate change. This is a vital question for growing old in urban areas. And I agree also that strengthening intergenerational dimension of age-friendly work, that's also very important. Next slide, please. I think also the third area is a bigger focus now on co-production. And this has come in because the aging population has changed. The greater interest, I think, in being part of the solution to the urban challenge. So some of the things we're looking at in Manchester, where there are big programs of urban regeneration, is how you get older people involved in an age-friendly urban regeneration. How you get older people involved in tackling social isolation as part of the research, and how you get more meaningful community interventions which bring older people together in collective organizations. Okay, next slide. So finally, before I have some questions, I think age-friendly work and COVID-19 inevitably, the issues that Eric was talking about are challenged by COVID-19 and will continue to be challenged, at least for the foreseeable future. And my view here is I think that we need to be doing at least four things. Firstly, targeting public health interventions on low-income communities. In the UK, it's low-income communities who've suffered most from COVID-19, and really emphasizing the extent to which it's poor people who are suffering the most, and poor elderly people who are suffering the most. I think it's terribly important. And often people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups in particular. We're seeing the rise of ageism running alongside COVID-19, which is extremely unfortunate given all the work from the EU tackling ageism, to see a resurgence of it in the context of COVID-19. So that's very important to challenge that development. We need to bring into the age-friendly debate residential and nursing home care. I mean, 40%, up to 40% of deaths of COVID-19 have been in residential and nursing homes. They need to be part of the debate about the future of urban aging. And finally, I think much more community-centered approaches to recovery planning from COVID-19, starting from the bottom up, as it were. Okay, David, final slide, please. And these questions, which I just have, I don't expect them to be answered. But anyway, I always think this is an interesting one, that we view urban areas and cities as key drivers for economic success. But can they integrate aging populations as well? I think that's a very interesting question. Can the age-friendly movement be part of the drive to address issues of inequalities and social justice affecting urban life? What forms of governance are best suited to developing age-friendly cities and communities? This is an important issue raised in the report. And I think a lot of questions about how we organise at a regional level and so on to really get age-friendly cities and communities off the ground. And of course, post-COVID, if there is a post-COVID, can older people play a bigger role in the future planning of cities and the communities within them? So those are my questions. David, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. Two things, given the time. So you have questions. I also have my own questions. I'm sure the audience has their questions, but we're going to leave that for the Q&A session. One of the things that I will encourage people to potentially do if they like, because obviously with Slido, that is designed to ask questions. But given that these are questions that have also been put out to you, please feel free, if you'd like to use the chat window, we'll all have a look at the chat window over the coffee break. But one of the things that I'd like to, there was one question that was asked about Eric's presentation that I've been requested to address, which is about Croatia and why it was not visible on the maps. And this was due to a lack of data from Eurostat for the specific years and the territorial levels shown in the map. So just to provide that answer as to the status of Croatia. Croatia, obviously, a very important country, dear to my heart because my wife is kind of from the region. So definitely not left out on purpose by any means. So now, given the time, I would suggest we take a 5-minute coffee break, that everybody goes and gets a poppy seed cake and a bowl of fruit. And I can't quite recall all of the other things that were on your list of things that you should be eating so that we can all live longer. And if you're feeling sinful, then maybe a cup of coffee. So I'd suggest everybody, including the speakers, if you'd like, you can turn off your cameras, mute your microphone, so that way you can stand up and stretch a little bit in case you're not sitting on a couch. And we'll see you back here in approximately 5 minutes so that we can continue our very interesting session. Thank you, and speak to you in 5 minutes. And hello, good morning to everybody as we return from our coffee break. I will give everyone a few seconds to sit down back in front of their computers, wherever they might be. Maybe you're out listening to this while you're having a walk. That's also a possibility. So while we have people coming back to their desks, let me welcome you back to the second half of today's event. Once again, a reminder for those of you that want to ask questions from any of the speakers, we'll have an opportunity for our panel session where we'll be answering your questions. Those questions come into us from Slido. You go to slido.com, and ESPON, E-S-P-O-N, is what you will type in so that you can get to the appropriate set of questions, which you can also vote on to say what is the most interesting to you. If you forget, please feel free to use the chat window, of course. And then we'll hopefully have a very nice and engaging discussion at the close of this session. So what I would like to do right now is we have 2 more talks before we get to that Q&A session. And again, just to remind you, please submit your questions at any time during those speeches. But what I will do now is pass on the virtual floor to Dr. Manfred Huber from WHO Europe. Dr. Huber is the coordinator healthy aging, disability, and long-term care at the WHO Regional Office for Europe. He joined the WHO in 2009, where he provides advice to member states in Europe on health and social care reform for healthy aging, better coordination of care, long-term care, disability, and rehabilitation. Prior to this, he was Director, Health and Care with the European Center for Social Welfare Policy and Research in Vienna. Moreover, he worked for 10 years with the OECD in Paris, where he was in charge of aging and health, health indicators, and health accounting. Dr. Huber is the author of a number of books on health and social services for aging population, and he has over 25 years of experience with international comparisons of health and social policy. And with that introduction, I would like to pass along the virtual floor. I pass it on to you, Dr. Huber.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everybody. It's really my great pleasure to join you for today's discussion at the occasion of the end of the project on adapting European cities for population aging, and to kick up this ESPON conference week. I have read the ACPA report with great interest, and I really want to congratulate the consortium contributors and authors for this great work. It's really very timely and great to see all the city examples. It's very encouraging for our work. Now, in my presentation today, I will talk about age-friendly environments in Europe in the context both of the decade of healthy aging and with some remarks about COVID-19. You have seen the decade is one of the anchors of the ACPA project. I'm very pleased to give you a bit more detail. Next slide, please. Now, the decade really is a WHO-led UN decade of concerted action that brings together governments, civil society, international organizations, professionals, academia, media, and private sector. So very much also who is sitting with us right now. Now the perspective is to have 10 years of concerted, catalytic, and collaborative action to improve the lives of older people, their families, and their communities. So this is the topic we talk about specifically today. Now, the decade comprises 4 action areas. First, it's about changing how we think, feel, and act toward age and aging. And this links to an ongoing global WHO campaign to combat ageism, but it's also very close to the agenda of age-friendly cities communities, as some of my previous speakers have already said. Now, the second is developing communities in ways that foster the ability of older people. And of course, that again is very close to what we talked about today. Now, the third is delivering person-centered, integrated care and primary health services that are responsive to older people. Also, often this is organized at local levels, or there are supportive initiatives, volunteering, that without which these services could not function. So again, there's a lot of overlap, and specifically in times of COVID-19, we have seen this very clearly. Now, the fourth is providing older people with access to long-term care. And again, we have seen how important that is to do this in safe and good quality way during the pandemic. Next slide. It's always useful here to remind what is healthy aging in the WHO definition, because this is core for WHO action for older people. Healthy aging is defined as the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables well-being in older age. And with functional ability in this context, it's a capability that enables people to be and do what they have reason to value. So a rather comprehensive, we hope so, view on aging. And this refers to people's ability to not only meet basic needs, but also to continue to learn, grow, and make decisions, be mobile, but also to build and maintain relationships, contribute to society more broadly. And with regard to the last dimension, indeed, age-friendly cities and community movement is very much in the driving seat for community engagement, where older people themselves and their organizations raise their voice. Next, please. Now, in 2019, the 194 member states of WHO had already called for the decade of healthy aging, so well ahead of the current pandemic. And the final proposal has now been endorsed by the World Health Assembly, as you may know, in August, with a request subsequently that the proposal now also goes to the United Nations General Assembly for endorsement, because it's a broader initiative bringing together other organizations as well, not only WHO. This process has just started in New York. It goes very smoothly, so we hope that this final step will also soon be taken. Now, clearly, the vision and multi-stakeholder collaboration of the decade are very crucial, even more crucial now in the time of COVID-19. As we are all well aware, people in the second half of their lives are bearing the brunt of COVID-19, in particular those with the highest age groups. We have, according to the latest numbers from Europe, and here it's a Europe of our 53 member states, so much broader than the EU and its associated countries. From the latest data, but I have to say this only where we have data reported, broken down by age, sex, and with some additional information. And according to this information, we have about a medium age of 81 years for those who recently died from COVID. We have about 96% of deaths with an underlying condition. Interestingly, more than 80% with cardiovascular issues, but also about 20% with neurological issues like dementia. So there's a big overlap, of course, between the older and highest age groups and being affected also by these underlying conditions. In addition, certainly COVID-19 the pandemic has exposed dysfunction and fragility in many systems and at various levels of governance. Next slide. I now want to talk about 4 core enablers that will support the decade, and also how they link to some of the first lessons from COVID-19. Now, among the enablers, one has several times been mentioned already. Now, the first is to listen to the diverse voices and meaningful engage older people, family members, caregivers, and communities, as the United Nations Secretary General has recently said and urged. Let's not treat older people as invisible or powerless. Older people's experience and perspective on the action prioritized in the decade will be highlighted, including, of course, the lessons that we need still to fully understand and learn from those that have been affected by COVID-19, either directly or in a broader sense. The second is nurturing leadership and building capacities at all levels. Now, for the decade, we have a specific platform where we will contribute to addressing gaps in knowledge, but also have a means of collecting and disseminating noticeable practice. So it's very great to see the examples that come up out from ACPA, and certainly some of the main lessons we should also highlight there. Now, third, connecting diverse stakeholders around the world to share and learn from the experiences. Others, again, with the Decade platform, we have a stage here, and this will hopefully help us to prepare also better understand what has happened during restricted mobility and the basis for recovering, and to achieve a state that is more ready of our communities for COVID-19 or some similar pandemic or emergency in the future. Now, the first, strengthening data research, I don't want to say too much about that, but of course we have seen also during the pandemic that we have issues with data. They are not routinely disaggregated. They are not available as soon as possible as we needed to look specifically at the situation of older people, or more broadly about health and well-being across the life course. And of course, we need to accelerate using technology for evidence, but also empower older persons and their families. We have seen what difference it can make. Those that have more digital literacy, it was earlier easier for them to connect, to stay connected, we of course local initiatives also have helped there. I mean, digital literacy is one of the initiatives that we have seen in many age-friendly initiatives have been quite popular. Now, next slide. The action area of developing communities in ways that foster the abilities of older people. I think we have heard quite a lot about that, about the central goal to enable older people to age safely in a place that is right for them, while retaining the autonomy, dignity, health, and well-being. So this is the vision in the Decade. And in the context of COVID-19, this means that we have seen much strain on cities' communities. COVID-19 has affected individuals, families profoundly, and disproportionately also older women and men. But also loss of job. We have to not forget that with older persons at WHO, we basically cover the second half of the life, so it's very much about also job opportunities and combating not only social isolation or depression or loneliness, but also providing opportunities for staying active, including in probably a job context. Now, the next slide. This shows you an overview on the history of how WHO Europe has supported age-friendly environments over the time, and we have also seen this very nicely, the timeline explained by Paul, and it's also in the ACPA report, so I don't need to say much about that. We will have a baseline report to the Decade, which will come out hopefully next week, and it has a very interesting chapter on the local assets for older persons by using new technology on aggregating the local points of interest, and then show how easy it is to access different of these points. That might be very interesting reading. It's quite innovative. Now the next slide, as I already said, and some others have said, we have seen that where we had age-friendly environments on the ground. These could make an impact during the crisis. Various voluntary support groups, and it was interesting. The ACPA webpage also has one of the another of these examples. And for me, I wonder if we can, in fact, also picking up what Chris has said, if we could maybe join forces and do this in a systematic way and have really a stock taking on how age-friendly environments have been supported. Next slide. Next, please. So what I can, I think, probably skip is the structure of our handbook. It's one of the milestones. It's what the ACPA project has built on. So all the details you have seen explained the different domains already today. So I can skip that. Next, it's 3 publications, so 3 clusters, very much interlinked. Then next slide. And also one specifically on the success factors for the policy processes. Very much we have built on our networks and also not only the global network but also the European network. Next slide. Third publication was on monitoring evaluation. This is, as has also been said, we are lagging behind in this policy field with really good indicators. Also, we have some really innovative examples. I like the example of the participatory method of films. Here we also in this handbook we highlight other participatory methods like photo voice. Now, next slide. I can skip the networks. They have been introduced. Interestingly here maybe is only that we have very much worked with the European Healthy Cities Network, so that the link with other topics and social concerns that have also we have been reminded to keep really hard. And then the next slide. Next, please. Yeah, we can skip that, and that brings me to the conclusions. So again, important that we have now a unique opportunity to draw the lessons from COVID. I think it would be great if we can do this together. The decade is a very timely opportunity also to take the stock taking and see where would we like to be in 10 years. And again, we have already seen that age-friendly environments can have a very important role. And with that, I would very much look forward to cooperate with all of us. I look forward to our discussions now. And also it's very timely right now to talk to all of you because we work on a European implementation plan for the decade. So it's great to see what we are including. With building our implementation plan, we build on work not only in the aging program, but also on the work that many other people in-house do. For example, migration and aging has been mentioned, so we have special work on that and also other aspects, and we try again to bring everything together. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that interesting presentation. So what we will do is we will continue to our last speaker before we move on to the Q&A section, where you'll have an opportunity to hear from everybody in an engaging fashion. We'll move on to our last presentation, which is going to be about digitalization, which I suppose this conference format is already a pretty good indication of how digitalization has been moving even more quickly than before COVID, if that seems possible, which has also been a challenge for policymakers in a number of fields, including in this one. So I'd like to, before I pass on the virtual floor, do one more introduction for Dr. Heidrun Mollenkopf. She's the vice president of the Age Platform Europe, a European network of nonprofit organizations of and for people aged over 50, which aims to voice and promote the interests of the 200 million citizens who are over the age of 50 in the European Union, looking to raise awareness on the issues that concern them the most. Well, she has studied sociology, psychology, and education in Erlangen, Mannheim, and in Berlin, and did her doctorate on the integration of old people through the use of modern technology. She was a research associate at the University of Mannheim, then at the Social Science Research Center in Berlin, and finally at the German Center for Aging Research in Heidelberg until 2014. She is a member of the board of directors of the Federal Working Group of Senior Citizens Organizations and is active in numerous committees on a national and European level. With that introduction, I would like to pass the virtual floor for our last presentation. Dr. Mollenkopf.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to this conference, and thank you for your kind introduction. I don't want to miss to mention here that there has been a close and fruitful collaboration between Age Platform and the ESPON ACPA project for several years now, and we will be happy to continue this. So my first slide, please. This conference is rather timely because the past months have shown all too obviously how important digital inclusion is for older people. Our world, and this also means the world of older people, is noticeably transforming into an increasingly digitalized world. The networking of devices into systems, the automation of activities and services, the replacement of people and tangible material by digital technologies opens new possibilities for action and freedom, but also involves risks. Digitalization, that is, new integrable devices, systems and services, can efficiently support older people in their autonomy and in their everyday life. They can provide the necessary support to maintain their mobility and social contacts, as well as access to health and care services, and by this ensure their full participation in society. Challenges concern, among others, older people's safety, autonomy, privacy, and equal treatment, as well as some gaps in the existing human rights framework. This is not adequately equipped to address issues arising from technological innovation up to now. So next slide, please. Why is this topic important at this conference? The life of older people does not take place in a vacuum, but rather on site, in a specific neighborhood, in a small or large city, in an urban or rural region. And of course, digitalization also affects these specific living environments of older people. The circumstances and preconditions of their communication options have changed a lot. Media for communication and assistive technologies have changed enormously. And the significance of having adequate technology available for getting essential information, for accessing vital health care, or for maintaining meaningful social relations has not changed at all. On the contrary. Next slide, please. On the contrary, the pandemic has shown that it is more significant than ever to have adequate, accessible, and trustworthy digital technology and respective assistive devices available, and to have the capacity to use them. Unfortunately, this is not a given condition, neither for all regions or cities, nor for all members of society. Digitalization and the health crisis impact older people in different ways, depending on their place of living, economic situation, health, status, abilities, gender, and so on. Professor Philipson has already highlighted this diversity. We know that older persons are less often equipped with the necessary technologies. Prosperous and wealthy people have much more available, and the less educated and less wealthy ones are less well equipped. There are differences between older men and older women, or between comparatively healthy persons and persons with disabilities. And often we can see a reinforcing intersectionality between those conditions, leading to multiple discrimination and exacerbating social inequalities. However, the right to information, to health care, and to social participation must be applicable to all older persons without limitations. Therefore, as a civil society organization representing older persons, we strongly welcome the recent Council conclusions of the European Union on the human rights, participation and well-being of older persons in the area of digitalization, offering strong hooks for future policy development at EU and member states level. They notably call to ensure the accessibility of public services, in particular health, social and long-term care services. They also insist on special attention that needs to be paid on the rights and needs of older persons, including older persons with disabilities. Next slide, please. To close the gaps, improvements are necessary at 3 levels: the social, the technical, and the structural levels. Independent living, adequate health care, and social participation increasingly demand the availability and use of digital technologies. However, financial means of older people are often extremely limited, making them unable to buy a computer or smartphone, or even to afford a SIM card or a flat rate. Therefore, to close the social gaps, it is crucial to ensure that those who need it get the financial and technical support to acquire or make use of the necessary prerequisites. As for the technical level, primarily the designers and manufacturers of the technologies and digital services are in demand. Technological devices and mobile application software must be barrier-free and well operating. Moreover, we call for sound legal protection against the risk of intrusion and fraud, and of age discrimination, especially where automated decision-making is used. At the same time, the provision of the technical prerequisites alone is not sufficient. Next slide, please. Instead, at the structural level, several further measures are needed as well. As the Internet has become an indispensable element of public services of general interest, it is the task of the governments at national, regional, and municipality levels to guarantee their citizens access to digital services and offers. This includes an efficient broadband network with free, reliable, and universally accessible Wi-Fi access, also in remote rural regions. City administrations, and that brings me back to the role of the cities in digitalization, are particularly challenged regarding this structural level, because municipalities themselves are increasingly offering services on the Internet, often exclusively. Local authorities should therefore feel obliged to ensure that access to such municipal services is offered barrier-free in all public institutions. And when setting up digital services, we expect providers to ensure that non-users are not discriminated against. Public digital health and social services in particular have to be designed in such a way that these services are easily accessible for all, in compliance with data protection regulations and safeguarding a person's privacy, while making sure that non-digital services are maintained as well. Media literacy is another prerequisite for digital participation, for which cities or city administrations can and must also take responsibility. Many older men and women have not had the opportunity to learn the necessary skills to autonomously navigate in the digital world. And conventional education institutions usually no longer reach older persons. For this reason, more informal learning opportunities that go beyond vocational training, as well as low-threshold centers to experience new technologies, need to be created in all municipalities. It goes without saying that educational offers must also consider older persons' different levels of knowledge, their learning biographies, and their cultural and individual diversity. Next slide, please. I come to my conclusions. In view of the tight schedule, I can touch all these issues only in a very superficial way. But what I wanted to convey to you is that the increasing digitalization of all areas of life is creating new opportunities and at the same time new risks for older persons. And that governments, be they national, regional or urban, must take responsibility for their older fellow citizens so that no one is lost on his or her way to the digitalized world. Moreover, legal regulations that would take both the enabling and the risky aspects of digitalization into account have been lacking to date. With the current pandemic, it has become even clearer than before that older persons' right to information, to health and care, to education, social integration and societal participation under the conditions of the digitalized societies is not yet sufficiently covered by law. Against this lack of legal clarity, and in view of the progressive digitalization at the same time, it is urgently necessary to set standards to guarantee equal rights for all older persons. The Council conclusions of the European Union on the human rights, as mentioned before, can be used as a useful guide on this path. So, thank you very much for listening.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And I would point out that we are exactly on time when it comes to our speakers. So I'd like to thank all of the speakers for their interesting words and also for ensuring that we have enough time for a nice panel discussion on the many topics that have been covered today. I've been taking notes, just writing down single words of a lot of the issues that are being covered. I have sustainability, socioeconomic issues, social networks, inequality, loneliness, digital, and the all-present COVID. And this is just some of the random words that I read. So we're covering quite a lot here today. And so I would encourage all of the participants now that perhaps now you've had an opportunity to hear everybody think about what are the topics that you would like most for our panelists to talk about. And please go to slido.com. The hashtag that you have to type in is ESPON, E-S-P-O-N. If that doesn't work for you, please just add your questions to the chat box. That's fine. Our team will ensure that they get added to Slido. And while you're taking a few minutes to formulate your questions and think about things, I'd like to introduce two further people that will be joining us for the panel discussions who haven't had a chance to speak yet. They've both participated as case study cities, one from the city of Oslo and one from the city of Amsterdam. So our first additional member of the panel is Anne-Berit Raffoss. Anne-Berit has been responsible for creating awareness of the age-friendly agenda in Norway through her work for the city of Oslo, creating the first age-friendly city in Norway. Through her secondment at the WHO in Geneva and 2 secondments in Brussels, she has also built up extensive knowledge about health politics, in particular concerning aging and health. Furthermore, EU policies and also EU policies and international development is another area that she acquired experience in. In particular, she has built up an expertise in age-friendly development in cities and communities. She established the working group Urban Aging in Eurocities, a network of all major European cities, and was chair of the working group from 2015 to 2019. She was also involved in the establishment of a Nordic network of age-friendly cities hosted by the Nordic Welfare Center and the Nordic Council of Ministers. Her current position is to build up a national network in Norway of age-friendly communities, enabling the creation of an age-friendly Norway. And our second person joining us for our panel discussion is Tom van Bentum from the Eurocities Urban Aging. He's the vice chair of the working group on active and healthy aging of Eurocities. He's worked for 5 years at the regional level at the province of North Holland, or Noord Holland, as they say here, supporting cities in their policy tasks in the field of youth and well-being. He's now head of the Policy Department of Public Health in the city of Amsterdam, and a member of the management team of the Public Health Organization, advisor to management and politicians on public health. So we can already see some questions coming up. Some of them are anonymous, some of them are not. I would encourage you, if there's a particular question that you feel that you are wanting to be answered in particular, please feel free to indicate that you like the question, and that way I will make sure to prioritize it and make sure that it receives time. And if it is directed at a particular individual, it is particularly helpful to put that into the question, so then I know exactly who you would like to have at least starting the answer to the question. I would remind all of the panelists, please feel free to unmute your microphones, turn on your cameras, and after I will direct the question to somebody to start. And then at that point, please feel free to jump in, because we want to make this as engaging as possible. So I'm going to start at the top of the list, which is directed first to Dr. Mollenkopf. And this is the question of whether digitization is just a temporary problem. So as we see digital natives, this term that is it's talked about with the younger people, is this just something we need to get over, this hump of people who don't understand digital, or is this an ongoing issue?
Yes, this is something I very often hear, that the problem will be solved with the next generations of younger persons, because they are used to use all this new technology. But I think this assumption is unrealistic, because successive younger cohorts are more experienced on the one hand, but the technology is developing on an ever faster pace. So in the future too, there will be people, young and old, who will not be able to use the latest gadgets and the latest software, and be they not able because of mental abilities or financial reasons, or just because they don't like it. So I think the problem will not be solved from itself or by times going by. And the problem will remain that people who are denied access to the internet will not be able to take advantage of the opportunities which they provide.
Would anybody else on the panel like to jump in on this point? In particular, for example, I find it interesting that, you know, on the one hand, yeah, you talk about a digital divide and sort of an ability to use digital, but as digital will continue to change, as you say, this will continue to be an issue, and it's also socioeconomic technologies that people need to buy into to make sure that they remain connected.
Yep.
Anybody else have any thoughts on digital? Okay, so I mean, Dr. Molenkamp, unless you would like to sort of follow up, we can move on to one of the next.
No, I saw that there is another question in this Slido about my legal concerns, and the main reason is that artificial intelligence is more and more used to do decision making, and these intelligent algorithms are not transparent. We don't know what is behind them. So it may be the case that older persons are discriminated by them, depending on what is included in these algorithms. And I think we need legal legislation that prevents older people from discrimination in this field.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have the work of the high-level group on artificial intelligence, which is looking at these ethical issues at a more general level, obviously.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you have any thoughts about, because I noticed that GDPR is also mentioned in the list of questions, and GDPR is a very specific element.
Yeah, can you explain a bit more what is behind that question?
Well, we have 5 people here, so if anybody would like to add to the chat box to give a bit of added content, or James in particular, James Farnan, who was asked that question, you can perhaps use the chat box. I can try and provide. I think for me, one of the issues that you have around GDPR and the challenges is if you think about smart cities, for example, and you say, okay, well, we would like to engage in particular activities that are targeting older people. And you can be more successful in targeting particular groups, the more data that you have available to you. But the point of GDPR and the whole ethical standard around data is to say, well, no, we don't want to be sharing all of that data, so that even though it is an improvement of services, GDPR brings us to the point of saying, well, no, we would prefer not to share that data. And so there's a bit of it's not really a disconnect, but it's a challenge in terms of getting a balance right between sharing data so that groups can be helped and not sharing data so that we can respect their privacy.
Yeah. I think this respect of privacy and of data protection is crucial to the whole development in digitalization and using big data, for instance. When I see normal, usual gadgets, like an oven, like a car, like what else you want, it is sure that the providers have to make sure that these gadgets are safe. But this is not the case for software, for any data use. And I think as this is a new problem, a new historical problem, because it is coming with the development of these technologies, there is no legislation preventing the misuse of the data and of the privacy of older persons, not just of older persons, of all persons who are involved in this development. And I think here again, it's absolutely necessary to have transparency, to have a good regulation, what is allowed, what are people seeing, what do they know about who uses their data, in which way will they be used. So these are very big concerns.
Does any other member of the panel like to jump in on digital issues?
Well, I mean, my only comment is, in a way, I think there's a tension in the arguments here. I'm not convinced that age is terribly important on this.
Right.
You know, I think Heidrun is, you know, makes this point really that you know, the challenges cut across different groups, and maybe this is a good example where moving away from an age-related approach is greatly advantageous. And I think one of the challenges is that digitalization and technology changes so fast that it is confronting all groups and thinking about the kind of structures that can assist people, particularly for education. I'm particularly, you know, Heidrun's point about the role of education here is, I think, absolutely vital. And I think that's an important thing which nation states can take a bigger responsibility for.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But Christopher, adding to that, Tom here, I think it also creates possibilities in helping people better. I mean, now we're focusing on the for me the dangerous side of big data and everything, but it also creates a huge number of opportunities of helping people in need far better than we were able to do like 10 years ago. So let's keep the balance between protecting people, but also using the positive sides of the whole phenomenon of big data and everything. Yes, it's a struggle, but let's keep an open mind to the struggle and not just focus on the protection part of it, but also on the possibilities that it creates in helping our citizens better.
Yeah, I would like to echo what Tom just said. I mean, not all of the data and the new technologies comes top down. There's also a lot that's happening bottom up, and the whole disability and aging movement has also created their own very useful information sources on the internet. So it really comes down to making as many people digital literacy as possible. I mean, one of the examples is, I mean, look at the Greater London toilet map. So I want to link technology to our most basic needs. I've seen it here during COVID to stay active, go for long walks, but one public toilet after the other was closing down during the lockdown, and every day you had to find out, was there still a toilet or not, and then the restaurants were closing down and so on. So if we could have this on a digital platform, that would really be helpful. I'm not aware of any example, but yeah.
I don't mean to be negative, Annabelle from Oslo here, but I still think we cannot underestimate the need for competence and accessibility. We still need to build up a lot of more competence and accessibility for older people to engage in the digitalized opportunities that we have.
I agree with that. I mean, I think right now we have 200,000 people in Greater Manchester that don't use the internet. 80% of those are aged 65 and over, and they tend to be in low-income communities as well. Although that's not uniform. So right now during COVID, we're just about to publish this week and send out 140,000 copies of a publication aimed at older people with information about keeping healthy, keeping connected, doing many other things, because public agencies by and large haven't really addressed that issue. I'm not sure in the kind of medium term the impact of access to technology. But I think these patterns of exclusion related to social class and to things like ethnicity will probably continue. And I think the last point on this is that, you know, the big corporations, all of them without exception, have developed large-scale programs to enter the marketplace. And it seems to me that those of us in the public sector have to engage, which is what we're doing locally, have to engage with these corporations in a way that means that we get the best of what they produce, because they're going to produce them anyway. So we need to intervene. We need to be on the front foot with these technologies to make sure that we get a better version of them than what we might get ordinarily.
Yes. Yes.
There's an interesting observation from Laura here about this connection between smart city strategy and aging policies. And I think this is an interesting point here, that the fact that she claims is that the smart policies are mostly technological solutions. And I think this is indeed a certain difficulty in observing, you know, how the elderly people, the aging population, may become part of smart city strategy, because apparently they are not the elderly people, or the this age cohort is not regarded as the most innovative and the most, say, adaptable to technological solutions. So we are, with the smart city strategy that's orientated towards younger, more energetic, more innovative, we're excluding one part of the city population.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is a good example for discrimination of older persons, of ageism and age discrimination. Yeah.
But I think that's just one example. If you look at most strategies, there tends to be a gap around aging and older people. The environmental programs tend to be focused on young people, and many others do as well. And I think, you know, our job, if you like, is to try and intervene and make alliances. I mean, Chris mentioned this in his presentation. It's to make alliances and to find the points of contact with these other overarching strategic programs. I mean, there are European platforms bringing together smart cities and aging, but I think that's probably less obvious at city and regional levels. And I think it just speaks to this issue that we haven't quite got there in terms of explaining the kind of short, medium, long-term impact of aging populations on people who make large-scale and lead large-scale programs for cities, city regions, and at national level. And whilst we don't do that, we'll continue to see these gaps in other strategic priorities.
And for me, this is an example. I can link it to a worst practice example. We have tried in Amsterdam to use technical innovations and to implement them on a large scale. So we really thought about scaling up some technical innovations. And there you see that the technical innovations really don't take into account the social services that are connected to those technical innovations. So what should you change in your social work and the social contracting that you do as a city to help anybody, really, not necessarily connected to older people. And that's one issue, that there's a misfit between technology and social services. And the second one is how do you procure technical solutions? When I start a procurement buy-in, for example, if I have to draw up the demands that I need as a city, I'm already too late, because the technological developments will have advanced well beyond the procurement thing that I put out onto the market. So we're always too late. So that's really, for me, well, it's not so much a worst practice, but as a whole category, actually, how do we successfully implement technical solutions that I think can contribute, and we can free up people working in social services or public health or anywhere, really, to do more sensible work, and let machines do what they can do as an addition, and not to replace people, but as an addition to social services, etc. Really hasn't worked at all here in Amsterdam.
Tony, that we focus on worst practices rather than best practices. But anyway, maybe some of the other panelists that are working at cities, if they have other concrete examples, I think that would be interesting for our participants to hear, just to get something very
David, is it this week or in the last year or
in the last couple of days? Whatever's freshest in your mind.
I think collectively we could have a session on worst practices, you know. I don't know.
Pick the most entertaining one.
Yeah.
Well, just pick one out and just to throw it out there.
Oh God.
I'll put you on the spot now, but that's my job as the moderator.
Yeah. I don't know.
One of the other panelists can jump in if they like, if they have another example of something very concrete.
If you spot it in Manchester,
jump in, but there is actually another question for Greater Manchester about negative stereotypes. So perhaps this could be one of your, say, worst practices if you could think of them.
So, yeah, I mean, very quickly on this one. I mean, I've put some stuff in the chat about, we've got a program now called Valuable Not Vulnerable, which is running, which is a series of videos and other materials and campaigns trying to change. But this is what we've been doing for, I don't know, 15 years, and actually right at the start, and I still see it now, I suppose. One of the mistakes we made at the start is, you know, the kind of older people as superhumans, and you see this quite a bit, you know, the marathon runners, people throwing them off sides of buildings and so on. And these are, I suppose, stereotypes of another type, which, so I think that was one mistake that we made. And actually, it's aging as every day, which I think is interesting. Older people doing everyday things, just like everybody else, I think is the thing to do. But it, you know, it's part of the DNA of lots of public services. You know, the NHS is a brilliant organisation, but the way it talks and thinks and organises around older people is not good. You know, and if we've made a mistake, it's not been able to engage the NHS, I think, in a discussion about how they think about ageing.
I wonder if I can just add to good ways of combating ageism. We have recently in Norway made a little film. We've sort of asked people from the years 7 until 88 what they're thinking about getting older. And there's such a diversity in the responses. There's negative, positive, there's humor, there's everything. And showing that diversity is really a very valuable tool. So I'd say media and films is a very good way of combating ageism and negative stereotype.
A very small detail, but I think it also speaks. You know, we always try to talk about older people, not elderlies. But the deeper we came into COVID-19, all politicians, even in house, they all talk now about elderlies, and I've almost given up to always send an email and say, please, no.
Yeah. No, the elderly is putting all older persons into one category, and this is something we should not do. There are so many diverse people that we cannot speak about just one group of elderly. We should speak about older persons.
It's also a kind of othering as well of older people. It's that they're a separate category. They're over there, it's not us, you know. I mean, we've done lots of work around trying to change the language that's used away from issues like frailty and so on, and the elderly. And I think we made some success, but never-ending campaign that we can all champion as well.
I do think there's, I think, Paul, the long-term work in Manchester has been outstanding. But I do think, and I'm speaking as a sociologist here, that we are in a really difficult situation at the moment, and for the foreseeable future, and that the trends in society are producing a tendency to categorize people, older people in particular. The sociological trends are in the opposite direction in terms of much greater diversity. And we haven't got a language, I think, yet to express that. And I think actually it's the job of organizations like the WHO, I can say this freely, of course, like the WHO, the EU, and so on, to actually help discover this language, because, you know, through your publications and so on, you contribute a great deal, very influential, to the construction of language about aging. But I think we have a real problem in very much at the present time, partly generated through COVID-19, which has restored a lot of the ageism which, you know, we managed to kind of, you know, hold back. But I think it's a more general social problem, this dichotomy between categorizing and diversification. And I, as a sociologist, you know, it seems to me a real knotty problem.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this. If I can complement a bit on this point, I would like to say that I have learned a lot from the experience with ACPA, being the coordinator of the entire research. And I perfectly remember one of the first meetings we had. Paul was stressing this point of not using the word elderly people, and this is something I've learned with great pleasure. So this is one of the billion things that I've learned with this experience, and this has been reflected also in all the deliveries of our ACPA report. And thank you again for this, Paul.
I actually always wanted to write a paper with the title a bit provocative: "Who is old and who are the elderlies?" But I never get across. It always drops in my busy schedule. Maybe you can help me on that.
Yeah.
It's changing a lot with what it means to be old, really. Biologically old, mentally old, health-related, say, age. So I think the categories are quite fuzzy, and some people might turn 60 and be still juvenile and fit. Some others are turning 40 and they are really, really elderly in quarter. So again, this is a so diverse group of people that we cannot put just one label on our seniors saying that when you turn 65, then you are an elderly person. So you need to just sit on your laurels and do nothing, basically.
Yeah, to add some advertisement here, the benchmark report to the decade will also show the diversity of functional stages.
Great. And noticing the time here, this is always the problem with the Q&A session. It's I always feel it should be longer, but we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I'm just going to pick out one of the questions. I would encourage participants that if they feel like they want to further engage at the conclusion, we'll let you know who you can get into contact with. Maybe you can arrange a phone call, Teams meeting, whatever it might be. But the last question I'd like to talk about, given that this is all about cooperation at the end of the day, is this question on how can we stimulate cooperation between different groups of stakeholders within cities. And let me first let Anna-Berit answer that question, since she's at a city. And then we'll let the other panelists add on to that.
Well, I think it's through creating synergies between different plans and strategies and initiatives of the different stakeholders. So you need to make age-friendly development relevant to the other sectors and their initiatives, be that smart city or sustainable development goals or other initiatives. You need to show how age-friendly development and the thinking can contribute into other initiatives and developments through co-creation, concrete projects, some good examples from other cities. You need to show how, in many respects, we have goals in common.
like to jump in on this point?
Yeah, I can only add to that. If you, if you work together within city departments. So if you work together, for example, we work with urban planning, how do you design an age-friendly neighborhood? No, that's a perfect example how you can work together. And if you design an age-friendly neighborhood, you don't do that just with the urban planning department, but you also do that with people that work in the neighborhood. So how would you develop that? If you do it once, then you have like a case study, and then that can be used and implemented within the urban planning department as a standard. So you can really, you need to move and wiggle and hassle, and and sometimes you have to get in between, even though people don't really see you coming yet. But you have to be a bit of a dealer and a broker, and make sure that you align the interests of an age-friendly city with other interests, because an age-friendly city is not that different from a healthy city or a green city or any city at all, really. It should be part of every strategy within your city, and you just have to make sure that you're there.
Yeah. Tom and Anna are right. You have to be in the right rooms. Sometimes you have to make a bit of a nuisance of yourself, to be frank, because people don't get this agenda. I don't think automatically in a way that other agendas kind of present themselves. I think I like this example as well about working at different kind of scales of the city. So you have to be present in your kind of decision making and policy making, but you also have to be present in the community and neighbourhood, and it's linking and playing between those different levels, which I think creates interest and a kind of dynamic element to our project. There's one other thing as well, I'd just say, which I think kind of connects all these things together, is that you've got to have a story to tell. And we call this kind of narrative building, I guess. You have to have a story to tell that is relevant to the place in which you are, which is understandable, and which is kind of ambitious. I mean, Eric made this point. You have to be kind of ambitious. If you just go into a room and say, well, everything's terrible, social services are struggling, and all the rest of it, people won't necessarily listen to you. I think if you say, as again, I think it's been indicated, where are we going to be in 10 or 20 years? What do we need to change? What are the ambitions that we've got? What are the emblematic projects? Where are the older people who are telling policymakers about the lives that they want to lead now and in the future? If you bundle these things together, I think you start to create that momentum and that kind of full mass that, and you've got to obviously interact with politicians as well, So you've got to fight on all these fronts. You've got to create a kind of infrastructure and capacity in your city to do that.
If I would just...
Yes, please, Chris. Yes, please.
One point I would just briefly make is that in the context of COVID-19, cities, of course, are being under the spotlight in terms of what is their future. I mean, I think they still have a great future, but it'll be a different future than pre-COVID. And in that context, age-friendly work has a unique role here in actually contributing to the debate about the future of cities in a way that hasn't been true before. Rethinking city centres and older people having a much bigger say and place in city centres. So I think could be a big possibility here.
So I will leave the last word to Dr. Sidarowski. And then,
thank you very much, David.
Close the panel.
Thank you. I think we have been extremely happy and grateful to all of you by being so engaged in this debate. And also what often does not work really well is the engagement of the audience. And through these questions we've got, it does seem that this is a burning topic, a burning need for many of us actually to dwell upon and then deliver some good stories. Because also what we are doing at ESPON is to bring you some inspiration. We give you a lot of good examples through our ESPON ACPA policy handbook on professional and volunteers who act at the local level. They know the inhabitants. We also have a lot of possibilities for sharing experience between cities through the platforms like EuroCities, Age Europe, the European Innovation Partnership on Active and Healthy Aging. And also through ESPON, we are giving you some further opportunities, because this is not just about ACPA projects. We have some akin projects like ESPON Escape about the shrinking rural regions. We have ESPON Quality of Life. So the topic of, healthy and fortunate aging is permeating through a number of our research fields in ESPON. And also we are offering you further case studies and peer learning workshops. So whenever you are at need of getting some information on how to deal with this problem, just reach out for ESPON, and also make use of the very great partnership we've created in the ESPON ACPA projects.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I notice we're right here at 12:30. And given that we've been, other than a coffee break, that we've been sitting in front of computers for a couple of hours, I will wrap things up with just 30 seconds of concluding remarks and information about who and when you should get in contact with individuals. So in very, very brief, I thought it was a very interesting session covering lots of different topics. And certainly what struck me in listening to everything was how aging connects to so many different other policy areas which are critical. We've heard about urban planning, we've heard about socioeconomic issues, we've heard about digital, we've heard about sustainability, we've heard about social justice. There are questions around gender that I saw in the question boxes, which could easily be covered. And really that this is a lot about how you connect one group of individuals into that bigger picture. And it's about supporting a particular group, but it's also about making sure that they are providing that added value to society that everybody wants to do at the end of the day. And I thought that was one of the things that came out nicely in this discussion. And then, of course, COVID-19, we cannot get away from COVID-19, at least not for another some months to go. And obviously that has been accelerating all kinds of trends that we have seen in the past years, which has been particularly challenging, I think, for policymakers, and something that's been addressed today. So if we can move to the next slide. So, one of the things that I've been asked to say is that there are case studies that are ongoing, and there's still an opportunity to register for those case study sessions. There is the website www.espon.eu/aging, and we would encourage you to visit that so that you can sign up for the case study session that would be of interest to you. And if I proceed to the last slide, I just want to say, I always joke with my colleagues that in the Netherlands, this is in Germany as well, they like to say, thank you for your attention. I always find this phrasing a little bit funny because I think you should just have enjoyed yourself, and I do not need to thank you for your attention, but I will say it for the sake of my colleagues. Thank you for your attention. I hope that you've enjoyed this session, that you've learned something from it. I would encourage you to get into contact with Piera. There is her email address here on the screen, or Hide as well. His email address is on the screen. There might be an opportunity to hook you up with some of the speakers today so that this can continue. And obviously these discussions will continue over the week as a part of this conference. And I'd like to thank you very, very much and wish you a good poppy seed cake. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon and a good lunch.
Thank you, David. Thanks for brilliant moderation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.